Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Time, and it is a minute past that right now. Mr. Trump made withdrawal from the agreement, of course, a campaign pledge while he was campaigning for the presidency, claiming it cost jobs in the energy sector and more broadly. Well, pulling out will put America in a very exclusive club because only Syria and Nicaragua are the nations who do not support the deal. Well, let's get the very latest now from our US correspondent Hannah Thomas-Peter in Washington, and then to our Europe correspondent Mark Stone in Brussels. And Hannah, as we look there at some of the presidential advisers, we understand that Donald Trump is going to pull the United States out.
Yes, that's what has been said in phone calls to congressional groups, phone calls briefing out the announcement ahead of time made by White House staff members. You can see there gathering on the edge of the Rose Garden in the White House, Steve Bannon, who is one of the key advisors of Donald Trump and somebody who's really pushed this populist, nationalist message. It was what got Donald Trump into the White House in large part. This recognition that individual Americans in the middle of the country felt like their nation bore an unfair burden of when it came to solving the world's problems, that there was too much big government regulation. Donald Trump promised to end all that, to withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord, and it looks like he is about to do just that. So he's chosen populism and popularity, really, particularly with his base, over America's reputation on the world stage, because the risk with all of this is that other countries will sense an opportunity to seize leadership on what is a defining issue of our time. And then more broadly, there will be other questions about whether or not America can be trusted to keep its word in the long term, when presidents can kind of come in and unilaterally decide to withdraw from something that 195 countries signed.
And a lot of international pressure, Hannah, on President Trump not to do this.
Yes, but actually Donald Trump quite enjoys that kind of dynamic because it gives him an opportunity to be contrary. And again, it's part of this populist message. Just because everybody says we should do something, why should we if it's not a good deal for America? We've just spoken actually to one of Donald Trump's former advisors on this and other issues. And he said Donald Trump's policy has always been America first. That was the central promise of his campaign, that if it wasn't a good deal for the American worker in particular, and also the American industrial sector and the miners and that kind of Rust Belt portion of America, and he wasn't going to consider it, which is why he's withdrawn from trade agreements and he's questioned America's commitment to NATO and the United Nations. It's not just related to climate change, but absolutely for world leaders and those who've driven the climate change agenda here. This is symbolically, at least, a pretty disastrous day. It's not quite clear yet exactly what Donald Trump is going to say, the caveats that he might introduce, because he's been lobbied hard by his own Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, as well as his own daughter, Ivanka Trump, who said, look, we've got to stay in this thing. It's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do for a modern America. So there may well still be a little bit of language that placates them. We know that he very much listens to his daughter's point of view, but he does like to be contrary and do the opposite of what the rest of the world wants, of what the liberal coastal elites want, and that it appears that that's what's going to happen.
OK, Hannah, for the time being, thank you very much indeed, keeping an eye for us on the White House lawn there. Let's go to Brussels, though, and talk to our Europe correspondent, Mark Stone, because, Mark, talking about the international pressure on Donald Trump, it doesn't come much bigger than China and the European Union, who've been meeting today, haven't they?
No, quite. And the European Union as a bloc is a huge emitter too, and therefore their presence and the European Union as a bloc every single country in it signing up to the accord back in 2015 was a big moment. China signing up to it was an altogether bigger moment. I mean, an enormous moment. There were many who thought that China would not, and if it did, it would somehow fudge it. It wouldn't stick to the pledges it had made. But it signed up, so did India, so did Japan, two other huge emitters. And that is, I think, one reason why there are many, including many who were celebrating back in December 2015 when this COP21, as it was known at the time, was signed. Many are not all that, not too despondent today, because they believe that China, India and Japan have been so forthright with their pledge to stick to this accord that alone keeps the momentum going, even without the United States for now being a part of this agreement. And the other point that Jean-Claude Juncker, the President of the European Commission, made yesterday when he was in Berlin, alongside Li Keqiang, the Chinese Premier, was that as a lawyer, Jean-Claude Juncker is a lawyer, he's read what the accord actually means. He suggested that Donald Trump probably hadn't read it, didn't really understand what it was all about. And he made the point that it takes an awfully long time to disentangle yourself from what has already been signed up to by the United States, perhaps even the length of time that would take it into the next US administration. So we will already have had another American election before America is actually withdrawn from the climate change agreement. We'll hear from Donald Trump pretty shortly. Of course, what he's doing is appealing to those that voted for him, saying that he will stick to his pledge to pull out of the accord. China, of course, it's worth reflecting, doesn't have to worry about its electorate because it doesn't have an electorate. China is sticking to this accord, is changing very, very quickly its energy from dirty coal and gas to more renewable energies. And in doing that, jobs are being lost. But they don't need to worry about that in China because they haven't got any elections. They don't need to worry about people voting for them or not. But it has to be said as well that what China is doing with some considerable success is creating jobs within the renewable energy sector in a way that many other countries thought wouldn't be possible, or at least thought that China wouldn't do.
And I know Prime Minister Li has had something to say on that. Shall we have a listen to him?
There is a saying in China, our words count and our actions should be successful. China will stand by its responsibility on climate change, and China doesn't stand alone in this question. Our scientists in this area are in connection with the world and follow the climate protection developments very closely.
OK, and our thanks to Mark Stone there in Brussels. Let's just take you to some of the details behind the Paris Agreement, what was actually in it. It was signed at the end of 2015, in December to be precise, and 195 countries, no less, including all of the world's biggest polluters, came to the consensus that greenhouse gas emissions had to be reduced, adopting the first universal, legally binding global climate deal in Paris. Now, the main goal, of course, is to limit a global temperature rise to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, and to try to limit a further aspiration, the rise to 1.5 degrees if possible. Now, each country then submitted a climate action plan on how it would contribute to achieving this, to be updated every 5 years, and different countries have done it different ways. The United States, under the Obama administration, set a 2025 goal of reducing their greenhouse gas emissions by 26 to 28% compared to 2005 levels. And for the United States, which is, of course, the largest historical producer of greenhouse gases, that should mean a cut of around 1.6 billion tonnes of emissions every single year. But, and this is the wriggle room for his successor, Barack Obama signed an executive order, you may be familiar with the use of those under President Trump, confirming the US's adoption of the agreement. That means he didn't submit it to a vote in Congress for approval. And that, therefore, is how the new president is able to cancel the US commitment if he so chooses. And just to remind you, often on the stump as a candidate, Trump promised to withdraw the United States from the accord, and we are, of course, now waiting to see if he follows through with that pledge. Let's just give you the latest shot from the White House garden there, the podium with the seal of the President of the United States set up there in the Rose Garden. All's gone fairly quiet there, and all the advisors have moved away from the door of the Oval Office. He was expected at 3 o'clock US time, East Coast time, but no sign of him there yet. We'll take you there as soon as the President appears. Now, in the meantime, I want to talk now with Joanna Haigh, the co-director of the Grantham Institute for Climate Change and the Environment at Imperial College London, and very good to talk to you. Are you worried? I mean, would this make a big difference if President Trump does pull out?
Well, yes, if
of
you'd
Paris?
asked me that question a few months ago, I would have said extremely worried. I mean, as we've heard, the US is emitting nearly a fifth of the world's carbon emissions, and so if they do nothing, that's a huge blow. But as your correspondent has explained, with all the other countries still on track, especially China, India and the EU, and today we've even heard that Russia is going to continue with its plans. I mean, this is quite extraordinary. There's many reasons to think that the US would be left behind the curve if it didn't participate.
I mean, it's only Nicaragua and Syria who aren't in it. I mean, it'd be quite a club to be in for the United States.
Yes. I think so, and there's many reasons that you'd want to reduce your CO2 emissions, even aside from any sort of altruistic save the world from 2 degrees scenarios. For example, the Chinese are doing it initially because of the huge impact on air quality. So when you're burning fossil fuels and coal, you get this horrible pollution, and we've seen the smogs in Beijing and other cities, and it's to reduce those smogs. So there's a health benefit. And as we've already heard, there's also economic benefits. So if you set up a new clean tech aspiration, so you're going to develop new clean ways of making renewable energy, you need industry to do it. You need the entrepreneurs, the inventors to do these things. Then you need the new workers, and that's a wonderful way to build a new industry. In the sorry.
I just wanted to talk about the agreement itself, and you know, we think back, it seems fairly recently, doesn't it, December 2015, and all the wrangling that went on there. And one of the criticisms at the time was that it wasn't firm enough. There weren't any real legally binding requirements. Each nation was able to go off and come up with its own plan. I mean, it was designed, and I remember China at the time was the one people were talking about, to keep those that might have been a bit reluctant in it. It would therefore be fairly easy, would it not, for the United States, for President Trump to say, well, it's not too onerous, a tweak here and a tweak there, and we can stay in it.
Well, possibly. So to set the picture, you need to look back to the previous discussion. So 6 years previously, there was the Copenhagen meeting, and there was a lot of hope that some agreement would be reached there, and it was hugely disappointing, and nothing at all was agreed, not even anything. So coming up to the Paris meeting, we were all, you know, really concerned that, again, nothing would happen, and if they made any agreement at all, it would be a good thing. But it was organised in a different way. So before the meeting, all the countries were asked to say what it was that they could do. So each of the countries was allowed to say what it would do in advance. And so then they couldn't say that other countries are putting pressure on them. And so there's this almost unanimous agreement. It was quite extraordinary. I mean, it was marvellous when that Paris meeting reached the agreement.
Almost like nudge theory. So you brought to the table what you thought you could do rather than someone pushing you into it.
Yes. So that's how they reached the agreement. Now, of course, actually getting the countries to meet those commitments is something. And actually, even if they did meet the commitments, it wouldn't get us to where we want to be, which is the below 2 degrees, or preferably 1.5 degrees above pre-industry. But it sets everybody on the right track.
Now, I mean, it can't be an exact science, can it? Because there is, I mean, that below 2 degrees will stop catastrophic warming. It's got to be the best guess, hasn't it? Because there isn't another planet, Earth, where this has been tried and that has worked. I mean, it's a hope, it's an estimate, isn't it?
It's an estimate, and of course there's a range of uncertainty around the estimate. But we know from looking at historical data and also from using computer models of the climate that we can estimate the sort of things that will happen in response to a 2-degree warming or a 1.5-degree warming, or indeed to larger warmings. And this is why we think that actually 2 degrees is as far as you really want to go.
But is it your worry and others' worries that even if the United States stayed in the agreement, and President Trump hasn't announced his decision yet, that even if they did, this wouldn't be enough. This wouldn't achieve that reduction in global warming.
No, if everybody fulfilled their commitments, it wouldn't be enough. But as part of the plan, there's a 5-year retake of what we're doing. Let's see if we can do better. And if you look at the cost of renewables coming down, it's quite likely that people will be able to do better than they had expected because of this, availability of clean energy.
And what about, though, if the United States, and we are told it's when the United States pulls out, are you not worried that this then will lead other big polluters to say, we don't need to bother, the United States is going the other way, we will too?
Well, I would have thought that, actually, beforehand, before, today or a few weeks ago, I would have thought that everybody else would say, oh, they're not bothering, we're not bothering. But what you've seen is all the other countries, the big polluters, continuing to say they're going to fulfill their Paris commitments. So we've got China, which is the big one, and the EU, and India, and now Russia, all saying we're going to carry on the right path.
John Hay, great to get your input. Thank you very much indeed for sharing your expertise with us. And at 8:30 or around then, it depends if the President has come out of the Oval Office and started talking, we may overrun that point. But the plan at the moment is at 8:30, I'm going to be talking to President Obama's former climate change advisor, who of course helped negotiate that Paris agreement, as well as a member of President Trump's transitional environment team, both of whom who take very different positions, as you can imagine, on global warming.
Here we have Vice President Mike Pence. He's just taking the podium and he will introduce the President of the United States. Let's listen to Vice President Pence.
Good afternoon. Secretary Mnuchin, Secretary Ross, EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt, members of Congress, distinguished guests, on behalf of the First Family, welcome to the White House. You know, it's the greatest privilege of my life to serve as Vice President to a President who is fighting every day to make America great again. Since the first day of this administration, President Donald Trump has been working tirelessly to keep the promises that he made to the American people. President Trump has been reforming health care, enforcing our laws, ending illegal immigration, rebuilding our military. And this president has been rolling back excessive regulations and unfair trade practices that were stifling American jobs. Thanks to President Trump's leadership, American businesses are growing again, investing in America again, and they're creating jobs in this country instead of shipping jobs overseas. Thanks to President Donald Trump, America is back. And just last week, we all witnessed the bold leadership of an American president on the world stage, putting America first. From the Middle East to Europe, as leader of the free world, President Trump reaffirmed historic alliances, forged new relationships, and called on the wider world to confront the threat of terrorism in new and renewed ways. And by the action the President will announce today, the American people and the wider world will see once again. Our President is choosing to put American jobs and American consumers first. Our President is choosing to put American energy and American industry first. And by his action today, President Donald Trump is choosing to put the forgotten men and women of America first. So with gratitude for his leadership and admiration for his unwavering commitment to the American people, it is now my high honor and distinct privilege to introduce to all of you the President of the United States of America, President Donald Trump.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I would like to begin by addressing the terrorist attack in Manila. We're closely monitoring the situation, and I will continue to give updates. Anything happens during this period of time, but it is really very sad as to what's going on throughout the world with terror. Our thoughts and our prayers are with all of those affected. Before we discuss the Paris Accord, I'd like to begin with an update on our tremendous, absolutely tremendous economic progress since Election Day on November 8th. The economy is starting to come back, and very, very rapidly. We've added $3.3 trillion in stock market value to our economy and more than 1 million private sector jobs. I've just returned from a trip overseas where we concluded nearly $350 billion of military and economic development for the United States, creating hundreds of thousands of jobs. It was a very, very successful trip, believe me. Thank you. Thank you. In my meetings at the G7, we have taken historic steps to demand fair and reciprocal trade that gives Americans a level playing field against other nations. We're also working very hard for peace in the Middle East, and perhaps even peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Our attacks on terrorism are greatly stepped up, and you see that. You see it all over. From the previous administration, including getting many other countries to make major contributions to the fight against terror. Big, big contributions are being made by countries that weren't doing so much in the form of contribution. One by one, we are keeping the promises I made to American people during my campaign for president, whether it's cutting job-killing regulations, appointing and confirming a tremendous Supreme Court justice, putting in place tough new ethics rules, achieving a record reduction in illegal immigration on our southern border, or bringing jobs, plants, and factories back into the United States at numbers which no one until this point thought even possible. And believe me, we've just begun. The fruits of our labor will be seen very shortly, even more so. On these issues and so many more, we're following through on our commitments, and I don't want anything to get in our way. I am fighting every day for the great people of this country. Therefore, in order to fulfill my solemn duty to protect America and its citizens, the United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord Thank you. Thank you. But begin negotiations to re-enter either the Paris Accord or in really entirely new transaction on terms that are fair to the United States, its businesses, its workers, its people, its taxpayers. So we're getting out, but we will start to negotiate, and we will see if we can make a deal that's fair. And if we can, that's great. And if we can't, that's fine. As president, I can put no other consideration before the well-being of American citizens. The Paris Climate Accord is simply the latest example of Washington entering into an agreement that disadvantages the United States to the exclusive benefit of other countries, leaving American workers, who I love, and taxpayers to absorb the cost in terms of lost jobs, lower wages, shuttered factories, and vastly diminished economic production. Thus, as of today, the United States will cease all implementation of the non-binding Paris Accord and the draconian financial and economic burdens the agreement imposes on our country. This includes ending the implementation of the nationally determined contribution and, very importantly, the Green Climate Fund, which is costing the United States a vast fortune. Compliance with the terms of the Paris Accord and the onerous energy restrictions that is placed on the United States could cost America as much as 2.7 million lost jobs by 2025, according to the National Economic Research Associates. This includes 440,000 fewer manufacturing jobs, not what we need. Believe me, this is not what we need, including automobile jobs and the further decimation of vital American industries on which countless communities rely. They rely for so much, and we would be giving them so little. According to the same study, by 2040, compliance with the commitments put into place by the previous administration would cut production for the following sectors: paper, down 12%. Cement, down 23%. Iron and steel, down 38%. Coal, and I happen to love the coal miners, down 86%. Natural gas, down 31%. The cost to the economy at this time would be close to $3 trillion in lost GDP and 6.5 million industrial jobs, while households would have $7,000 less income, and in many cases, much worse than that. Not only does this deal subject our citizens to harsh economic restrictions, it fails to live up to our environmental ideals. As someone who cares deeply about the environment, which I do, I cannot in good conscience support a deal that punishes the United States, which is what it does. The world's leader in environmental protection, while imposing no meaningful obligations on the world's leading polluters. For example, under the agreement, China will be able to increase these emissions by a staggering number of years, 13. They can do whatever they want for 13 years, not us. India makes its participation contingent on receiving billions and billions and billions of dollars in foreign aid from developed countries. There are many other examples, but the bottom line is that the Paris Accord is very unfair at the highest level to the United States. Further, while the current agreement effectively blocks the development of clean coal in America, which it does, and the mines are starting to open up. We're having a big opening in 2 weeks. Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, so many places. A big opening of a brand new mine. It's unheard of. For many, many years, that hasn't happened. They asked me if I'd go. I'm going to try. China will be allowed to build hundreds of additional coal plants. So we can't build the plants, but they can, according to this agreement. India will be allowed to double its coal production by 2020. Think of it. India can double their coal production. We're supposed to get rid of ours. Even Europe is allowed to continue construction of coal plants. In short, the agreement doesn't eliminate coal jobs. It just transfers those jobs out of America and the United States and ships them to foreign countries. This agreement is less about the climate and more about other countries gaining a financial advantage over the United States.
The rest of the world applauded when we signed the Paris Agreement. They went wild. They were so happy. For the simple reason that it put our country, the United States of America, which we all love, at a very, very big economic disadvantage. A cynic would say the obvious reason for economic competitors and their wish to see us remain in the agreement is so that we continue to suffer this self-inflicted major economic wound. We would find it very hard to compete with other countries from other parts of the world. We have among the most abundant energy reserves on the planet, sufficient to lift millions of America's poorest workers out of poverty. Yet under this agreement, we are effectively putting these reserves under lock and key, taking away the great wealth of our nation. It's great wealth. It's phenomenal wealth. Not so long ago, we had no idea we had such wealth. And leaving millions and millions of families trapped in poverty and joblessness. The agreement is a massive redistribution of United States wealth to other countries. At 1% growth, renewable sources of energy can meet some of our domestic demand. But at 3 or 4% growth, which I expect, we need all forms of available American energy, or our country will be at grave risk of brownouts and blackouts. Our businesses will come to a halt in many cases, and the American family will suffer the consequences in the form of lost jobs and a very diminished quality of life. Even if the Paris Agreement were implemented in full, with total compliance from all nations, it is estimated it would only produce a 0.2 of 1 degree, think of that, this much, Celsius reduction in global temperature by the year 2100. Tiny, tiny amount. In fact, 14 days of carbon emissions from China alone would wipe out the gains from America, and this is an incredible statistic, would totally wipe out the gains from America's expected reductions in the year 2030, after we have had to spend billions and billions of dollars, lost jobs, closed factories, and suffered much higher energy costs for our businesses and for our homes. As the Wall Street Journal wrote this morning, the reality is that withdrawing is in America's economic interest and won't matter much to the climate. The United States under the Trump administration will continue to be the cleanest and most environmentally friendly country on earth. We'll be the cleanest. We're going to have the cleanest air. We're going to have the cleanest water. We will be environmentally friendly, but we're not going to put our businesses out of work. And we're not going to lose our jobs. We're going to grow. We're going to grow rapidly. And I think you just read, it just came out minutes ago, the small business report. Small businesses, as of just now, are booming, hiring people, one of the best reports they've seen in many years. I'm willing to immediately work with Democratic leaders to either negotiate our way back into Paris under the terms that are fair to the United States and its workers, or to negotiate a new deal that protects our country and its taxpayers. So if the obstructionists want to get together with me, let's make them non-obstructionists. We will all sit down and we will get back into the deal and we'll make it good, and we won't be closing up our factories and we won't be losing our jobs, and we'll sit down with the Democrats and all of the people that represent either the Paris Accord or something that we could do that's much better than the Paris Accord. And I think the people of our country will be thrilled, and I think then the people of the world will be thrilled. But until we do that, we're out of the agreement. I will work to ensure that America remains the world's leader on environmental issues, but under a framework that is fair and where the burdens and responsibilities are equally shared among the many nations all around the world. No responsible leader can put the workers and the people of their country at this debilitating and tremendous disadvantage. The fact that the Paris deal hamstrings the United States while empowering some of the world's top polluting countries should dispel any doubt as to the real reason why foreign lobbyists wish to keep our magnificent country tied up and bound down by this agreement. It's to give their country an economic edge over the United States. That's not going to happen while I'm president. I'm sorry. My job as president is to do everything within my power to give America a level playing field and to create the economic, regulatory, and tax structures that make America the most prosperous and productive country on earth, and with the highest standard of living and the highest standard of environmental protection. Our tax bill is moving along in Congress, and I believe it's doing very well. I think a lot of people will be very pleasantly surprised. The Republicans are working very, very hard. We'd love to have support from the Democrats, but we may have to go it alone, but it's going very well. The Paris Agreement handicaps the United States economy in order to win praise from the very foreign capitals and global activists that have long sought to gain wealth at our country's expense. They don't put America first. I do, and I always will. The same nations asking us to stay in the agreement are the countries that have collectively cost America trillions of dollars through tough trade practices and, in many cases, lax contributions to our critical military alliance. You see what's happening. It's pretty obvious to those that want to keep an open mind. At what point does America get demeaned? At what point do they start laughing at us as a country? We want fair treatment for its citizens, and we want fair treatment for our taxpayers. We don't want other leaders and other countries laughing at us anymore, and they won't be. They won't be. I was elected to represent the citizens of Pittsburgh, not Paris. I promised I would exit or renegotiate any deal which fails to serve America's interests. Many trade deals will soon be under renegotiation. Very rarely do we have a deal that works for this country, but they'll soon be under renegotiation. The process has begun from day one. But now we're down to business. Beyond the severe energy restrictions inflicted by the Paris Accord, it includes yet another scheme to redistribute wealth out of the United States through the so-called Green Climate Fund, nice name, which calls for developed countries to send $100 billion to developing countries, all on top of America's existing and massive foreign aid payments. So we're going to be paying billions and billions and billions of dollars, and we're already way ahead of anybody else. Many of the other countries haven't spent anything. And many of them will never pay one dime. The Green Fund would likely obligate the United States to commit potentially tens of billions of dollars, of which the United States has already handed over $1 billion. Nobody else is even close. Most of them haven't even paid anything, including funds raided out of America's budget for the war against terrorism. That's where they came. Believe me, they didn't come from me. They came just before I came into office. Not good. And not good the way they took the money. In 2015, the United Nations, departing top climate officials, reportedly described the $100 billion per year as peanuts, and stated that the $100 billion is the tail that wags the dog. In 2015, the Green Climate Fund's executive director reportedly stated that estimated funding needed would increase to $450 billion per year after 2020, and nobody even knows where the money is going to. Nobody's been able to say, where is it going to? Of course, the world's top polluters have no affirmative obligations under the Green Fund, which we terminate. America is $20 trillion in debt. Cash-strapped cities cannot hire enough police officers or fix vital infrastructure. Millions of our citizens are out of work, and yet, under the Paris Accord, billions of dollars that ought to be invested right here in America will be sent to the very countries that have taken our factories and our jobs away from us. So think of that. There are serious legal and constitutional issues as well. Foreign leaders in Europe, Asia, and across the world should not have more to say with respect to the U.S. economy than our own citizens and their elected representatives. Thus, our withdrawal from the agreement represents a reassertion of America's sovereignty. Our Constitution is unique among all nations of the world. And it is my highest obligation and greatest honor to protect it. And I will. Staying in the agreement could also pose serious obstacles for the United States as we begin the process of unlocking the restrictions on America's abundant energy reserves, which we have started very strongly. It would once have been unthinkable that an international agreement could prevent the United States from conducting its own domestic economic affairs. But this is the new reality we face if we do not leave the agreement or if we do not negotiate a far better deal. The risks grow as historically these agreements only tend to become more and more ambitious over time. In other words, the Paris framework is just a starting point, as bad as it is, not an end point. And exiting the agreement protects the United States from future intrusions on the United States' sovereignty and massive future legal liability. Believe me, we have massive legal liability if we stay in. As president, I have one obligation, and that obligation is to the American people. The Paris Accord would undermine our economy, hamstring our workers, weaken our sovereignty, impose unacceptable legal risk, and put us at a permanent disadvantage to the other countries of the world. It is time to exit the Paris Accord. And time to pursue a new deal that protects the environment, our companies, our citizens, and our country. It is time to put Youngstown, Ohio, Detroit, Michigan, and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, along with many, many other locations within our great country. Scott, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your decision today to exit the Paris Accord reflects your unflinching commitment to put America first. And by exiting, you're fulfilling yet one more campaign promise to the American people. Please know that I'm thankful for your fortitude, your courage, and your steadfastness as you serve and lead our country. America finally has a leader who answers only to the people, not to the special interests who have had their way for way too long. In everything you do, Mr. President, you're fighting for the forgotten men and women across this country. You're a champion for the hardworking citizens all across this land who just want a government that listens to them and represents their interests. You have promised to put America first in all that you do. And you've done that in any number of ways, from trade to national security to protecting our border to right-sizing Washington, D.C. And today you've put America first with regard to international agreements and the environment. This is an historic restoration of American economic independence, one that will benefit the working class, the working poor, and working people of all stripes. With this action, you have declared that the people are rulers of this country once again. And it should be noted that we as a nation do it better than anyone in the world in striking the balance between growing our economy, growing jobs, while also being a good steward of our environment. We owe no apologies to other nations for our environmental stewardship. After all, before the Paris Accord was ever signed, America had reduced its CO2 footprint to levels from the early 1990s. In fact, between the years 2000 and 2014, the United States reduced its carbon emissions by 18+%. And this was accomplished not through government mandate, but accomplished through innovation and technology of the American private sector. For that reason, Mr. President, you have corrected a view that was paramount in Paris, that somehow the United States should penalize its own economy, be apologetic, lead with our chin, while the rest of the world does little. Other nations talk a good game. We lead with action, not words. Our efforts, Mr. President, as you know, should be on exporting our technology, our innovation, to nations who seek to reduce their CO2 footprint to learn from us. That should be our focus, versus agreeing to unachievable targets that harm our economy and the American people. Mr. President, it takes courage, it takes commitment to say no to the plaudits of men while doing what's right by the American people. You have that courage, and the American people can take comfort because you have their backs. Thank you, Mr. President.
Donald Trump there speaking in the Rose Garden at the White House, confirming that he is going to withdraw the US from the Paris Climate Change Agreement. Now, that is the agreement, of course, where countries agreed back in 2015 to keep global temperatures below 2 degrees Celsius. He joins only Syria and Nicaragua in not signing up to that agreement. Well, we can speak now to David Kreutzer, who is in Washington for us. He's a senior research fellow at the Heritage Foundation, was also a member of the Trump transition team for the Environmental Protection Agency. What did you make of the speech?
Well, I've been hearing that we were going to withdraw, so there's nothing new there. I thought he leaned a little heavy on other countries were benefiting from the Paris Agreement while we were losing. I think all the countries in it are losing. But I'm encouraged by it. I'm glad that he stuck with his campaign promise and got us out of what is really a bad deal all around. If we stayed in, it would raise energy costs. It would reduce the economy and reduce the income of our families. So it's a win for energy consumers, a win for job creators, a win for families here.
The economics here very strongly, but what about the environmental issues? I mean, surely it is important for countries around the world to unite together and try and find a resolution for climate change.
Well, not clear about that, but if that were the case, this certainly is not the vehicle. The impact of the Paris Agreement, even if all the targets are met by all the countries in 2030 and the targets are maintained for the rest of the century, would moderate warming by less than 0.2 of a degree. So, and if we look at the extreme weather that everybody seems to be scared about, there's no trend in hurricanes, there's no trend in tornadoes, there's no trend in floods or droughts. It's gotten warmer. Some of that is almost certainly due to man-made CO2 emissions, but the scary stuff that people are talking about do not appear to be on the scary upward trend that the models had predicted.
Well, I think certainly those are relatively controversial areas where lots of people would potentially disagree with you on those points in particular. But at the same time, do you think that the US is in danger of looking isolated here? The only two other countries who haven't signed up to this agreement are Syria and Nicaragua.
No, look, I don't think that's a problem at all. I think a lot of countries signed on because they were expecting to get a big chunk of that $100 billion per year Green Climate Fund. I fully expect that some of the other countries will follow us out of it, actually.
Do you think that there was much debate within the Donald Trump team over whether or not the US should withdraw from this?
From what I've read, I wasn't involved in those debates. I had been pushing for, ever since the agreement was signed to get out of it. But from what I hear, yeah, he had some of his closest advisors, his family, his daughter and son-in-law that he apparently trusts very much. Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, have been pushing to stay in, and I think less for climate reasons than just to be sort of a good neighbor. Well, others were pushing strongly to get out because it had such high costs and so little climate impact that it was an expensive symbol, and we don't need to do expensive symbols.
One person, of course, who did disagree very strongly with Donald Trump on this is Barack Obama, the former president of the United States, who's issued a statement, very rare statement really, saying that he thought the US should be at the front of the pack and that other countries will reap the benefits. Do you think this is partly Donald Trump trying to break away from Barack Obama and doing something different?
Well, I think he was very different in a lot of ways, and I don't think he's picking an issue just so he can show some difference. I think he genuinely believes that this was a bad agreement. We need to get out of it. It's a lot of the climate stuff of the past administration was symbolic, but it was very expensive. So when it gets down to it, it didn't do anything except cost us money. So those are agreements that are bad. Those are policies that are bad. We should get away from those.
Okay, David Kreutzer, thank you very much for your thoughts on that.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Well, joining us now from Brussels for more reaction on Donald Trump's press conference is our Europe correspondent, Mark Stone. Mark, what did you make of what Donald Trump announced today?
Well, it's very interesting what the European Union is already saying. The European Commissioner for Climate Change has said today is a sad day for the global community as a key partner turns its back on the fight against climate change. The EU deeply regrets the the unilateral decision by the Trump administration to withdraw the US from the Paris Agreement. I imagine that Li Keqiang, the Chinese premier, who's here in Brussels tonight having dinner alongside Donald Tusk and Jean-Claude Juncker, I imagine they were watching that because they would have wanted to hear exactly what Donald Trump had to say about it. It was a remarkable statement, an hour long, in which he outlined in great detail why he thought America was better off outside the climate accord. And he ended by saying simply that he was elected to represent the people of Pittsburgh, not Paris. I suppose he perhaps didn't look at the fact that the people of Pittsburgh, in fact, voted Democrat, not Republican, in the election. But he's talking about the wider Rust Belt community of Pennsylvania, places where they will have been very, very pleased that he has made this decision to withdraw. The question is, how does he actually untangle the United States from the agreement? Experts are saying it's going to take up to 2, 3, perhaps even 4 years to remove America from the agreement, by which time there will have been another American election. So questions there. And also there's an awful lot of people saying that, you know what, it doesn't matter too much now that America has pulled out, because the gusto and the enthusiasm with which big emitters like China, India and Japan have signed up to the agreement and are sticking to it is so incredible that if America pulls out, well, that's not going to matter too much. A couple of points to pick up on. He specifically talked about issues that were things that he thought were unfair on America. The fact that China, he said, is still allowed to build many coal power plants and is still building them. That's interesting, and it's true. China is building power plants and continuing to build many of them. The difference, though, with China, and this accord it has been written specifically so that different countries can do things at different speeds to make it achievable. China may well be building power plants still, but the idiosyncrasies of China mean that actually those power plants aren't really being used. It sounds crazy, but it happens a lot in China. They're building these power plants, but regional governments are not actually going to fire them up. Most of them are being used at about 50% capacity. The thing that you really take away from Donald Trump's speech, I think, is that a lot of what he says doesn't appear to be backed up by fact. And in fact, listening to what he was saying, it appeared at times that he was reading the speech almost for the first time, saying this is an incredible statistic after just as he was reading it. And he referred quite a few times to Paris, as if Paris was somehow specifically related to climate change, not just happened to be the city where the climate change accord was signed. But for the people, perhaps not of Pittsburgh, but certainly of Pennsylvania and the Rust Belt, this is altogether good news. Whether or not he can deliver, and whether or not he's absolutely right in saying that by ripping up or pulling out of this accord it's going to make any difference to those people, well, we'll see. Of course, as Barack Obama pointed out, many believe that America will now be left behind because other countries are going to change their technologies, are going to invest in green energy in a way that America won't, and as a result it'll be left behind.
Thank you, Mark.
I've been getting away with it all.